Now we're recording. Yeah, so small audience today, but Amy, your research will reach more people through this recording, so I'm really looking forward to it. I'll hand over to you.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you both for kind of joining in. I will admit that this is an idea coming out of my research. This particular angle is sort of an idea I've just been tossing around. It's not particularly very well developed, so I'm very open to comments or suggestions or other thoughts. It's also a bit of the verdict of a year where lots of things have been pushed to the end and then suddenly it's a deadline. So forgive me for some fairly slapdash PowerPoint slides. So let me share my screen so you can see those. Fabulous. So today I'll be talking about kind of the relationship between online communities and organisations. And so I've called this Lessons from a Study of Australian Defence Force Partners. And so I am based at the University of Canberra, and my research was done through Central Queensland University with Kate as my primary supervisor. And now it's not clicking through. There we go. So a bit about the Australian Defence Force if you're not familiar with it. So it is a relatively small but very professional kind of military organisation. It consists of the three services, which are of course the Army, Navy and Air Force. It has 80,000 members and it is increasing and looking to significantly increase over the future. You've likely seen some news reports about them buying new submarines and ships and airplanes and all sorts of things. And that's part of kind of an increasing capability growth. And they are going to need new people, new human capital with which to, fly those planes and I don't know what the word is, drive the boats? Probably get in trouble from someone when I say that. So about the kind of makeup of the Defence Force, majority of permanent members are male, 81%, that's surprising to nobody. Median age of 31 years, so again, quite young, and they're actually highly likely to be married, so 41% of members are married. Now, of course, this doesn't capture people who are in significant long-term relationships, but haven't actually declared that relationship. So partners, which are people in relationships with ADF members, play a critical role in defence capability. And we know that partners influence both the physical and the mental well-being of the member. So there's some really interesting studies in the US that actually show if a member's in a stable, loving relationship, when they come home from a deployment, they're less likely to experience PTSD symptoms. So that's really important. Also, members are more likely to be ready to deploy quickly if they're in stable, loving relationships with mentally well partners. So really, really kind of critical capability there. However, military life does place families under significant pressure. So things like deployments and relocations really kind of put families under significant pressure from, you can imagine most people move around every 2 to 3 years. That has a massive impact on, children's education, employment, access to specialist services, some really significant costs for that. And so despite the fact that the Australian Defence Force talks often about families and how important families are and how, we couldn't do it without our families at home, Australian academic research and research across the board is actually still quite limited, though I have been really encouraged lately by some fantastic new initiatives and some fantastic new research coming out in the Australian space. So it seems like a real area of growth and capability and attention right now, particularly in regards to partner employment, which is really exciting. So now to talk broadly, I'm talking today about Facebook groups. Now, many people are probably familiar with Facebook groups, you're probably a member of a couple of groups yourself. So essentially groups are just places on social media platform Facebook where people can get together with other like-minded people. So this is just a screen grab. If you type in skiing into Facebook, it will suggest for you some groups where you can get together with other people to talk about skiing, if skiing happens to be your thing. So like many people, Australian Defence Force partners are members of Facebook groups, and they specifically have Facebook groups for helping them to manage military life. So I haven't put screenshots of those groups here for ethical reasons. Those groups are listed by the members within them as often private or secret groups, so not comfortable sharing those details outside of those spaces. But they are things like if you own horses and you're also in the Defence Force or married to a Defence Force member, that's a massive thing. How do you move your horse around every 2 to 3 years? And if Kate was here, she'd probably be nodding and telling us exactly how problematic that would be. But so, people are getting together in these groups to share that really specific knowledge that they need. There's also location-based groups. So, spouses are living in Canberra or spouses are living in Rockhampton, all sorts of those sorts of things. So we know that they use these groups for sharing information and for accessing social support. And really interestingly, what kicked off my research was that the Department of Defence, in a survey in 2015, actually found that social media networks like Facebook might have actually been starting to replace official information sources. So when partners needed to know something, instead of going to set organisations like the Defence Community Organisation, they were jumping onto Facebook and asking their peers for advice. And so that's really interesting, particularly coming from a background where for a very long time the Australian Defence Force seemed to almost be in denial that people were using social media in this way. They definitely know it existed. They weren't being ignorant about it, but they didn't recommend the groups as a support source. They didn't talk about them on any sort of official external channels. They seemed to just almost pretend like these groups were non-existent. So then, of course, in 2015, that people are actually starting to prefer these sources to official information sources becomes quite significant. So the research that I did was qualitative through interviews and focus groups. I spoke with 35 ADF partners, most of whom were female. I only spoke to one male participant, which actually quite maps the demographic. It is predominantly men who are in the military who are married to civilian women. So in that way, that's I've forgotten the word, but that's fair. And it was a digital ethnographic methodology. So I didn't actually end up looking at the conversations within the the Facebook groups themselves, and that's a whole other presentation about ethics and access. But I interviewed people and spoke to them about what they were using Facebook for. So one of the findings comes around this idea of abstract systems, which is a theory from Giddens. And he says that these are systems of professional expertise that organise large areas of the social environment. So in a nutshell, he sort of says that these are really big, wieldy, complex systems that we have to interact with without actually really knowing how the full system works. We have to just trust in it. So Giddens gives the example of an airline. You don't actually know how to fly a plane. You don't know how planes work. You don't know how they're serviced. But you need to travel. So you get on the plane and you just have to trust. You just have to trust in that sort of system of airline travel to get you safely from one destination to another. And he also talks about that there are points at which we interact with the system. So for example, you're sitting on the plane and you get to see the airline host. And if that host is calm and relaxed, that probably increases your trust in the system. If that host is frantic and disorganized, it probably decreases your trust in that system. So, although we can't interact with airline travel as a system, we can interact directly with those points. So my research found or argues that the military is an abstract system. Although the Australian Defence Force is its own beast, it is also a kind of a government tool, and governments are big and unwieldy, and how do you actually understand what they are? And people have to interact within this military system when they can't necessarily understand the whole thing, and they just have to have trust within that system, particularly for partners who are impacted so much by this system that they're not actually necessarily part of or understand really how it works. So if you're being told, no, you have to move from one side of the country to another, that system then has an incredible influence over your life. So access to information then has a really core impact on the relationship between the individual and the abstract system. So information allows individuals to either expand their knowledge of the expert system, so it allows them to better understand the system, or interestingly, it actually allows them to bypass it entirely. So people can say, nope, your system sucks, I don't want to be part of this, I don't want to have to interact with you at all, and information allows people to do with that. And specifically here, when we're talking about information, we're talking about social media, because what is social media if not a giant information hub? So basically social media either gives these partners access to this really kind of good high-level information that allows them to understand the system better, but social media also allows partners just to say, no, I don't want to be part of this, I want to bypass this entirely. Really interesting stuff. So of course, in that, partners are sort of managing their risk of interacting with the abstract system, and they just say no. And social media is a great way for that. It kind of allows partners to just decide not to interact with the Australian Defence Force or the Defence Force support organisations directly, and entirely receive all of their information from social media networks if they choose, or social media and other networks. So why is this good for partners? So partners really like it because social media gives them access to the same or even better information. So it's more specific. You know, when you call a helpline or you get a pamphlet, it's not necessarily just for you, it's for a whole bunch of people like you. Whereas Facebook, you can say, look, my son is 12, he goes to this school, where can I get support? And that can really target him more specifically. It's also more timely. So you can post on one of these Facebook groups, you know, I have to go to hospital and I have no one here to look after my children, and another partner in your area is on your front doorstep in 20 minutes saying, yeah, look, I'm here to help you, what can I do? You know, so really sort of specific, timely, practical information and support that they can access. It also gives them the ability to collate their resources and combine areas of identity. So where sort of within Defence Information Systems, you're sort of a partner, and that's your entire role. Whereas on Facebook, you can also be a daughter and a sister and a wife and a, you know, and a teacher or something. You can have those multiple identities all active at the same time. Participants in my research also indicated that they perceived greater accuracy of information from social media than from official networks. So they considered that people on social media had less bias, they were less likely to be lying to them or have an agenda when they were giving that information, as opposed to the official support networks, which they suggested, well, of course, you know, of course they're lying to us, or of course they're trying to tell us what we need to hear. Of course they wouldn't tell us the truth. So it's a couple of reasons why partners really liked it. Why it's concerning for the ADF organisation, again, one of those is misinformation. So people going online and saying, oh, if you fill out this form, you'll get a $10,000 payment, so make sure you do that form. Well, that's not true. Or, oh, the kind of ship will be home on the 10th of December. Well, that's also not true. You know, and what are the risks of that misinformation floating around? Also, it builds unrealistic expectations sometimes. So people are saying, oh, well, these are the things that this Defence Force will do for you. They will come to your house and look after your children. They will give you these sorts of emergency payouts. And so because the ADF is not involved in those spaces, that information is sort of allowed to percolate and be shared around in ways that perhaps the organisation would not like it to be. And a bit unique to this situation, but there are also some security risks associated with this, where partners are sharing sensitive information online. Though I do have a separate paper about this, which says it's actually probably far less than we would expect. People are probably quite immediately just scared that, oh, people are online and they're sharing information and it's really bad. But actually, partners really care about the information they're sharing. They're quite protective of it. And the security risks more come from a lack of training and a lack of knowledge rather than a lack of intent to do the right thing. So essentially, the ADF's been absent from the online space for a really long time. And they've actually only recently started to see partners as key stakeholders. So I suppose us in comms, we would immediately go, well, these people are stakeholders, you need to communicate with them in these ways. The Australian Defence Force hasn't really been seeing partners like that for a very long time. And really I've only kind of started to begin to understand the importance of communicating clearly and frequently and often with this group, and seeing them as critical stakeholders rather than, you know, a side sort of group that are a bit pesky and they have to deal with, but actually really critically understanding the importance here. Why it's a lesson for others. So online communities can be an excellent source of support for organisations. So one thing I've really been kind of thinking about lately is the Kmart Facebook groups. And I don't know if anyone's part of those, but people are kind of getting together in these like We Love Kmart or Kmart Mums groups, and they're sharing products that they've bought from Kmart and how they've styled those products around their home, and then 10,000 other women across Australia then run to Kmart and buy those products and put those products in their home. And Kmart has not done anything with these groups. They're entirely community-led. Kmart doesn't really engage with them very much at all that I'm aware of. And, you know, and sometimes even news organisations pull these stories from Facebook. Oh, look at this woman with this $10 Kmart hack and how she's changed her life. You know, really incredibly powerful stuff for the organisation. And, you know, and Kmart, they don't engage directly. And I find that really interesting, how that's a brand community going on there. Online communities can also be a source of risk. And in the case of the Australian Defence Force, it starts becoming really obvious that, you know, because they've been absent from this space, it's been really difficult to rebuild those communication links when they're really needed. So they're starting to acknowledge that, oh, there's information being shared in these groups and we don't have any sort of buy-in. We don't have any control over that information. And we also don't know how to go back and get that control. We don't know how to go back in and start talking to people because we've lost that trust. That trust is broken down. So I think kind of being involved in these spaces doesn't necessarily mean being directly involved all the time. You know, you don't have to actually have someone who's actively managing these groups, but it is really about being aware that these groups are taking place, being aware of what's happening in the groups, and actively managing that as part of your communications or your stakeholder plan. So those are kind of my early thoughts, and that's quite quick, I'm aware, about what's happening in those spaces for partners, and then also some thoughts for kind of other organisations.
Very interesting.
Thanks, Amy. That was fantastic. Yeah. Can you say their early thoughts? Where are you in this project?
I've finished off the project entirely, and so it was part of the PhD. It's
Right.
published, and I'm starting to pull out individual parts from that. I'm also currently talking directly with various defence organisations about their communication strategies and their communication plans going forward. So this is almost a marriage between those two things of the academic theory and then also practically what does this mean for those organisations and how should they go forward.
Fantastic. And are you an ADF partner?
Yes, so my husband is full-time in the service.
Okay.
So we have definitely experienced some of those highs and lows and some of those great moments. So MH370, when it went missing, definitely experienced the call that said, I'm coming home to get some socks and then I don't know when I'll be back.
Yeah.
So yes, all part and parcel of it, which made also research really interesting, being an insider in the community.
Yes.
That was a key part of that research then.
Indeed. Nicole, do you have any questions? I've got a few, but I'll hand over.
Nothing I can think of immediately, but yeah, that just an observation that the idea around that whole brand community when you talked about the Kmart hacks. I'm not in that group, but I'm in other groups, brand community groups. I'm actually an admin of one in particular, and it's really interesting, as you say, that concept of all of this stuff happening around the brand loyalty, the brand perception, that often the brand are completely unconnected to and have no control over. And that's sort of, I'm thinking in terms of my future research, moving into that area of brand communities, as opposed to which my previous research was looking at motherhood support communities on Facebook. So yeah, I just find that really interesting, and it's a whole new world out there for brands, for companies, because there is no control. And what's the answer? Do they engage? Do they not engage? Is there a right or wrong answer? I just don't think we know yet. And I think it highly depends on what the nature of that brand and that community is.
Absolutely, I would agree. I don't, if Kmart called me up and said, should we get involved in those groups? I don't know that I'd say yes. I think they're actually running fine on their own, and getting involved could actually be a negative experience for the brand rather than a positive one.
Yeah, I think definitely observe, take note, take lesson, listen, because it's kind of like an ongoing online focus group, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. I mean, they don't have any control over it in terms of the questions, but it's kind of playing out in front of their eyes, watching their brand community and their behavior and their practices and their habits and their buying habits particularly, it's gold. Like it literally, and I think the brands that ignore these communities are not smart. But I think the brands that try and intervene too much in these communities are not smart either. It's kind of like a very fine line, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think and next week, that's coming up quickly, I'm going to the Digital Intimacies Conference to talk about the experiences of women in closed Facebook groups and some of the risks of that. And I think Kmart's a really interesting example of those where actually some of these women are participating in these groups, and they're lovingly styling their houses, and they're trying to provide these spaces for their families, and they've got quite an emotional buy-in. And then there are other groups which take screenshots of these posts and say, oh, look, this woman tried to decorate her toilet. Isn't that embarrassing? Look at the mess under here. She's such a slob. And it's, really emotional for the people who are involved in that. And I find that interesting too, that, people are there's this bullying aspect, I suppose I would call it, online. And both, that's interesting within the groups themselves, but then it's also interesting from an organisation point of view. When do you stop it? Is Kmart
responsible?
That's right. Are they liable? Just say a Kmart mum harms herself or something bad comes as a result of that bullying on those Facebook groups. Who's responsible? Is it? I mean, there was a recent case. I don't know if you heard in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, where there was a neighbourhood Facebook group set up by a resident and turned into a lawsuit. And like the woman who was the admin of the group was sued. It's scary. So those of us who are admin, I'm admin of several different groups that kind of spread across all parts of the community. It's kind of a bit scary when you think about where you might be, I guess, liable.
And the point is, Nicole, I think, you're more in touch with this. You would probably see some dangers as they're arising on your groups, but there are so many people setting up these groups that have no understanding of social communication. And, that's where I feel for this poor lady that was sued because, in a way it was her fault for not doing anything about it, but at the same time, she wasn't the instigator of the bad vibes. So, it's hard.
And back to the Defence Force example, in some of these partner groups, because they're these safe spaces, women are going online and disclosing domestic violence, self-harming tendencies, and that's really important because if that's the only safe space where they feel able to disclose these things, these groups become really important, but also a massive risk.
Well, right. Who's responsible for helping that woman out of that situation? Or,
Will it get to the point where everyone who's a Facebook administrator will be a mandatory reporter?
Yes.
Where are we going with this?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. I had actually highlighted the issue of control as well, Nicole, so thanks for bringing that up. We always have, or organisations still have this desire for control, don't they? And are fearful when they don't have it. And I'm wondering, do we need to turn that around a bit? And, we used to talk about managing media when really you never did manage media. You might try.
It was a false sense of security.
That's right. Exactly. And we've got to get the organisational thinking, I think, changed that they never did have control, and they have even less now. So how are they going to work in that environment? But can I change the conversation to, it's sort of related in a way. I'm really interested also in the way that the people put their trust in these forums. And I guess what you're saying about talking about domestic violence, but the risks are the misinformation, whether it's well-intended or malicious. There's this level of trust. And I think that's something really to be explored. We don't know much about it and why they're doing that, and whether there's anything that can be done, about it. I guess it's all part of also the fake news momentum, isn't it? That people are believing what they're seeing and what they're hearing. Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the questions I asked participants, as I said, do you trust the information you get from Defence? And they would say, not really. And I'd say, do you trust the information you get on social media? And people are like, yeah, mostly.
Yeah.
And just that real actual just switch of like, yes, they still, do your normal, verification. You know, they're not naive and think everything they read online is true,
Yeah.
but they're actually far more kind of prepped to believe or trust in information delivered by their peers on social media than they are to trust in official information coming through.
Which is really sad and a lesson for the organisation, isn't it? Well, why aren't we being trusted? You know, to explore that. So I think both the trust issue and the control issue is all about organisational listening. You know, and you were both saying before, you know, that this is an advantage for Kmart to really you know, use this as part of their evaluation process, you know, to inform what they do. So again, it's about getting our heads out of our whatevers and actually thinking not about us so much, but what's going on in that space and how can we take from that rather than broadcasting all the time, which is the problem. Yeah.
Absolutely. And look, the Defence Force, they're under a whole array of other considerations. You know, even part of privacy laws, they can't directly contact partners. Partners have to contact them first before they're allowed to receive information. It's a government department, so that brings with it a whole range of other complexities. So I'm sure actually there's some fantastic people working in the space, and they'd love to be agile and do some really exciting things, and they're kind of tied down by some of this.
Well, as you said, it's an abstract system. And I think, you know, that's exactly what you're explaining. I totally agree, having been involved myself in the organisation, that how, you know, I have empathy for those that are trying to manage this new world of communication. It's a big challenge. Yeah. That's great. Nicole, is there anything else you wanted to bring up?
I don't think so. That was all very interesting.
Yeah.
And very much aligned with the research I've been doing.
And I took that from something you said a moment ago as well. And but similarly, it aligns with some of the research I'm doing. And I think one of the benefits of a forum like this is for us to see those connections and potentially to follow up later with them. Yeah. So, yeah, maybe we need a Facebook group, Amy.
I think after this discussion, I'm not going to administrate it. Someone else.
I've got enough too, and I think Nicole has as well.
My problem is I need to sit on my hands. I keep putting my hand up for stuff. But we do have the ACPRESS Facebook group I set up earlier this year, the Australian Public Relations Academic Network.
Yes, and I wasn't aware of that until a couple of days ago, so I've just joined.
Yeah, so I set that up earlier in the year when I was trying to organise the Pitch This competition.
Right.
Just also as another way of trying to figure out who everyone was and gather people together in a forum where we can share ideas about other things related to, you know, PR, research, academia, teaching in our country. So, Amy, feel free to join that.
Fabulous. That was the, can't remember, I saw one and now I'm going mind blank because it's the end of the year and I'm very tired.
We've all got that.
What was fabulous? Sorry, I didn't hear the first part of your sentence.
I remember hearing about the public relations competition.
Oh, yes. You might have seen the video, the short promotional video somewhere, because I did share that far and wide.
Yeah, very possibly. But it was fantastic.
Yeah,
it was good. Looking forward to growing it for next year.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of I've got to plan a meeting with the PRIA, but what I'm hoping is maybe changing it a bit so that we can make it it's more of a submission by video, and then we choose the winners from the video, and then that winning team can present and be awarded at the Golden Target Award dinner each year, wherever that may be in the country. And hopefully we can get a sponsor who can provide some funding to get those students there.
Yeah, fantastic.
That's kind of what we're looking at for next year. But yeah, feel free, Amy, to join that group.
Yeah, I will do. Thank you. And then I'll be in touch and would love to.
Yeah, it's called Australian Public Relations Academic Network.
Okay.
APRAN.
I actually had a lot of problems finding it, and so
do you want me to shoot you the link for it then, Amy?
Yeah, someone sent me an invitation, and that was good.
Okay. I'll what's your email address, Amy?
So it's Amy, AMY.
Yeah.
.Johnson, JOHNSON.
Yeah.
At Canberra.
Yeah.
.edu.au.
All right, I'll share that with you now.
Yeah, that'd be fabulous. Because look, we probably for quite a while here have had a strong marketing team, but probably less of a strong PR team. And we've got some fabulous PR students. So we're looking at really kind of growing that in the next few years.
Yeah.
Doesn't it all go round in circles? I was there many years ago. And yep, with the PR. I'm going to turn the recording off, but Amy, I'd just like a word with you. Nicole, feel free to stay in, but I'm just going to turn the recording off at the moment unless there's any final points anyone wants to make.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.